So, now we know our way around Blender and how to create some basic geometry. But before we dive into the fun stuff, we just need to learn a little bit more theory, and that is subdivision. Polygon modeling is a technique that uses meshes to approximate surfaces, approximate being the key word. Since meshes are composed of straight edges, nothing is ever truly rounded. To create the illusion of curves or smooth shapes, we break these edges into smaller segments. While each segment remains straight, the increased density makes the shape appear smoother to the eye. To round this corner, we could manually divide the edges, reposition the vertices, and repeat the process until we achieve the desired curve. However, there is a much more efficient way to achieve this using a subdivision modifier. The subdivision modifier applies this process non-destructively. With levels set to 1, it produces the same result as manually splitting and adjusting the edges, while automatically balancing the repositioning of vertices based on their neighbouring points. However, since it's only a modifier, the actual geometry remains unchanged. We're simply seeing a preview of what it would look like if applied. To make these changes permanent, open the Modifier tab, access the drop-down menu and click Apply. Once applied, we gain full control over the newly generated geometry. If we manually move the vertices, the rounding becomes uneven. While we could rebalance it, doing so would be very time consuming. If we undo a few steps and reinstate the subdivision modifier, we can adjust the vertices freely while ensuring the smoothing remains perfectly balanced. This is one of the key advantages of using a modifier. The benefit becomes even more apparent as we increase the levels. Setting it to 2 cuts each edge twice, 3 cuts them 3 times, and so on. With each increase, the shape appears smoother, making the subdivision a powerful tool for creating rounded forms. In short, more subdivisions means smoother results. It's important to note that no matter how many subdivisions you add, the original vertex always moves to the same position. This means that applying a single subdivision modifier with level 2 is not the same as stacking 2 subdivision modifiers with level 1. The results will differ. Let's try the same exercise again, but this time we'll cut the edges once so that each has a vertex at its midpoint. As before, the subdivision modifier splits each edge and adjusts the new vertices based on their neighbours. Since the vertex and its 2 neighbouring vertices are along a straight line, the average calculation results in no movement, so this area remains a straight line. If we select these 2 vertices and move them closer to the corner, we get a smaller radius. Adding a level 1 subdivision modifier to a square divides all edges evenly, and since there are no end vertices, all points are pulled inwards equally, forming an octagon. Increasing the subdivision levels will make the shape appear rounder, but will never produce a perfect circle. For reference, here's a Bezier circle alongside a hexagon and an octagon with subdivision modifiers added. And as you can see, you'd need at least an octagon to approximate the shape of a true circle. Now let's try the subdivision modifier on a cube. As before, it splits each edge and moves the vertices inboard. It also splits each face into 4, and the proxy vertices are moved an average amount relative to their position. What it actually does is create a vertex in the middle of whatever shape it is, and then creates an edge to the nearest newly created vertices and then pulls them in to make the shape appear smoother. So in this case, it just happens to be 4 new quads. But if we started with a triangle, for example, this description would be more accurate. Since it divides edges, it will always result in quads. So a triangle's 3 sides will be divided and result in 6 sides and will be converted into 4-sided shapes. This is important to keep in mind when modelling. especially if you're struggling to maintain an all-quad topology. You can use this to your advantage to help plan and achieve cleaner geometry. Going back to our cube, if the subdivision level was set to 2, each of those new faces would again be divided into 4, further refining the shape and smoothing the parameter edges. And as before, we can only see a proxy of the new faces, meaning we cannot manipulate the new geometry until we apply the subdivision modifier. If we right-click on this cube and select Shade Smooth, it takes on the appearance of a smooth sphere. This happens because the Shade Smooth function averages the normals between faces, creating the illusion of a softer, less faceted surface. However, this effect is purely visual. It doesn't alter the geometry, only the way light interacts with it. By default, optimal display is enabled in the subdivision modifier, which adjusts the way the wireframe cage wraps over the subdivided geometry. Essentially, edges follow the shape of the smoothed face. This edge becomes this one becomes this one, and so on. If you don't see the wireframe, go to the Properties panel, navigate to the Object tab, then under Viewport Display, enable Wireframe. Disabling optimal display reveals the full proxy mesh, showing all the resulting edges and faces. Now let's explore how we can manipulate geometry to customize the rounding of corners. We'll start by adding a subdivision modifier with levels set to 2. As expected, this will round out the shape. The key reason for this rounding is that each edge is positioned at the average of its connected vertices. For example, this edge is the average of these 3 vertices, and this edge follows the same rule. Since this boundary vertex only has 2 edges attached to it, it is classified as a corner. To preserve sharp corners while using the subdivision modifier, go to the Advanced section and set the Boundary Smooth option to keep corners. This prevents the modifier from affecting corner vertices while still smoothing the rest of the geometry. Now that we understand the mechanics behind the rounding effect, how can we control it? If we want a sharper corner, we can achieve this by adding a bevel. Select the edge and press Ctrl B, and drag left or right to control the bevel size. Scrolling the middle mouse button will increase or decrease the number of segments in the bevel. For precise control, left click to confirm, then adjust the settings in the bevel dialog box. Let's set the width to 200mm and the segments to 1, creating a clean 45-degree bevel. To maintain a consistent bevel regardless of further modifications, we can add a bevel modifier above the subdivision modifier in the stack. This ensures the bevel is applied first. Disabling the subdivision modifier temporarily lets us see the effect of the bevel alone. If we extrude these 2 edges, we'll notice that the bevel modifier applies to some edges but not others. This happens because the default setting constrains the bevel to angles greater than 30 degrees. If we set this to 0, the modifier will apply to all edges. But what if we only want to bevel specific edges? A common way to manually define which edges receive the bevel is by using the mean bevel weight. To do this, in the bevel modifier, change the limit method to weight, select an edge, go to the Item tab and adjust its mean bevel weight. A weight of 1 applies the full bevel, in this case 200mm. A bevel weight of 0.5, half the bevel, i.e. 100mm. Another useful tool when working with subdivision modifiers is the mean crease. If there are specific edges where you don't want the subdivision modifier to have an effect, you can select those edges and assign a mean crease value to them. This gives finer control over how the geometry deforms. By combining subdivision and bevel modifiers, we can precisely control the shape of our corners while maintaining flexibility in our workflow.